I'm Brittany. This is my co-host Shilian, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, we finish Volume 4 of the Villain Self-Saving System. My apologies for the late start. My camera has kind of been giving me shit for a little bit, and for a little bit now, for a little while now, the past couple of weeks. And today was no different. Long story. Nobody cares about the technical details. So it took me a little bit to actually finally get here, but here we are. So, we are on page, we are on page 312. We were in the middle of the side story, Regret of Chunan, and we were right before what I'm sure is an absolutely wild passage from said Regret of Chunan. We're going to continue to get to know each other a little bit better in this context. And I just get to fling myself into the wild blue yonder of whatever the hell is about to pass over my eyes. And there's really nothing else to do except kind of jump in. So we might take a break midway through. We might not. I don't know. Now that I've gotten such a late start, we're kind of pressed for time. So we're not going to take a break if I can absolutely help it. So, as the pages flipped by, he would yet be struck by lightning from the heavens. Regret of Chunan, Part 55. Heavenly Demons, Nefarious Blood. This is very clearly, it even looks different on the page, right? This is very clearly the next excerpt. They were pressed chest to chest. Lo Binghe could feel the tender, supple skin of the person in his arms. It was moist and glowing as they soaked in the mountain spring. Without a word, he embraced Shen Qingqiu and leaned down to kiss him deeply, sometimes biting his lips and lightly tugging, sometimes plunging his tongue inside to brashly tangle with his. It's the brashly tangle. It's the fan fiction of it all. Though Shen Qingqiu was unwilling, the heavenly demon's blood stirred within his stomach and his entire body went weak. In addition, he was being kissed until he couldn't breathe, his chest rising up and down in uneven intervals, and as his nipples brushed against Lo Binghe's muscles, they slowly hardened. I don't think they slowly hardened. Anyway. Without his notice, his legs had been pried open, and Lo Binghe plunged inside. I don't think there was any preamble to that. Though they had been entangled from dusk till dawn for a while now, and Shen Qingqiu had grown used to Lo Binghe's enormous length. This sudden intrusion was still extremely uncomfortable, especially as when that, fleshy member, that's a bit cursed. That's a bit cursed. Speared open his inner wall. We're really just getting down to it today, by the way. We're diving in, right in. So much so that I just knocked myself entirely. Fleshy member, cursed. Yeah, speared, nonetheless. Speared. Word choice is important. Open his inner walls. Warm spring water poured in along with it, and his entrance drank more than a little bit of liquid. Once again, I'm not entirely sure that that's how that happens, unless he's pulling out. No, if you pull out even just most of the way, that might create enough to let some water in. But the fit's usually pretty flush, you know what I mean? The legs hanging from both sides of Lo Binghe's waist squeezed him tight, and his insides fluttered as well. Lo Binghe was only thrilled at how that little hole squeezed and sucked him in, because of course it did. Of course it did. Of course it did. Roughly kneading Shen Qingqiu's bottom to make him relax, he adjusted his position. Not long afterward, Shen Qingqiu caught his breath and scolded him through his tears. Get out! Oh. Lo Binghe smiled. Shizun chides me so, but his body seems to disagree. Shen Qingqiu clenched his teeth, unwilling to give in. If you hadn't fed me that poisoned blood, how could I be so tormented by an ingrate like you? Under the control of Heavenly Demon's blood, the only option left to him was to obediently spread his legs even further. Oh, relax his hole. And allow Lo Binghe to fuck him. Wait a second. Under the, control of Heavenly Demon's blood. So it's not totally a sex pollen thing, but it's adjacent. He is otherwise compelled. His flesh seductively cradled Lo Binghe, lightly clinging to him. Shen Qingqiu's breath came in gasps on the brink of sobs, and after a particularly hard thrust, his lips drew tight, low whines seeping out from his nose. Lo Binghe had one arm under his bottom, keeping their hips tightly interlocked, as his other hand blithely smacked Shen Qingqiu's round, snow-white cheeks once with every thrust. This is the second spanking mention, and I think a paragraph. I will never be unimpressed by how I can just glance away and entirely lose my place like this. Thank you. Shen Qingqiu was overcome with humiliation. Lo Binghe didn't let him rest for long after that round and carried him out of the spring. Once Shen Qingqiu left the water, his limbs and whole tightened. It's the focus. It's the focus. We're going to learn this about me. It's the focus on that very specific part of the anatomy that I usually, not my preference, just not my preference, something about it. I'm also bodily fluid averse in most contexts, so this is just very specifically a me thing. Once again, I swear to God, the ADHD is really leaping out today. Tightened, beset by the cold air, Lo Binghe set him down like a sacrifice on an altar, bare on a nearby chunk of limestone. Then he drew him into an interlocked embrace below the open sky. The limestone was ice cold, and Shen Qingqiu began to squirm as soon as he was set down. His skin was fair and pale, and after that vigorous round of lovemaking in the warmth of the spring, his entire body was flushed a bewitching pink. Black eyes, painted like stars, swelled with dewy ripples as their focus blurred, tired and drowsy, his spirit like dying embers. He turned his head, refusing to look straight at his traitorous disciple, Lo Binghe. Lo Binghe slotted himself between his legs, slinging those pale calves over his shoulders, and sank his cock inside him, then began to thrust at an unhurried pace. Every inch of Shen Qingqiu's fleshy, there we are again, fleshy walls were stretched to the limit as they were scraped by that pillar. The creases at his entrance were stretched smooth. That was a detail I needed. Shen Qingqiu had nothing to say. That was the end of the excerpt, by the way. Shen Qingqiu had nothing to say. Drugging, non-con, force. What a marvelous buffet. This author was having a lot of fun, weren't they? She directly put that in there. That is an actual line. This author was having a lot of fun, weren't they? Yeah. I think the author's having fun. Maybe a little bit. Actually, I never imagined that Heavenly Demon's blood could be used in such a way, said Lo Binghe. Shen Qingqiu was silent. After bearing witness to the depths of the original proud immortal demon Wei's depravity, it wasn't as if he had never thought of it. He just never expected that one day this usage would be applied to him. My eyes have been opened, said Shen Qingqiu. Lo Binghe nodded. My eyes have been opened. And he continued, so this disciple can't have had his eyes opened for nothing, can he? This in and of itself is fanfiction-y. The characters discovering fanfiction, reading it, and then getting inspired, and then doing their own thing is fanfiction. Who hasn't read at least one of those? Lo Binghe, even though this master has allowed you to... I never allowed you all this variety, Shen Qingqiu said in a warning tone. Lo Binghe started, oh, this disciple understands. He looked a bit disappointed, but he didn't push the issue. Now Shen Qingqiu was the one feeling uneasy. Lo Binghe had never made any requests of him when it came to these matters. Because of his lackluster skill, he was always cautious in the extreme, and he even somewhat capitulated to Shen Qingqiu. Now he had finally acquired some instructional materials, and found a bit of self-confidence. Hoping to try them out together, only for Shen Qingqiu to toss a basin of cold water over his head. Shen Qingqiu squirmed in his seat. After a while, he finally picked up his fan to cover his face and said with some reserve, how do you want to do it? All at once, Lo Binghe came alive, like a flower blooming in the warmth of spring. Shen Qingqiu was inwardly pleased by this, and he told himself he might as well forsake his poor face and play along. They had already done it either way. What did he need face for? Just to be safe, he forced himself to pick up Regret of Chunan and flip through it rapidly, even as a vein jumped in his forehead, but he didn't find any positions or techniques that seemed too illogical, and so relaxed a bit. Only to turn around and see Lo Binghe walking toward him, all smiles as he earnestly held up an even thicker booklet. Shizun, why are you looking at that one? Shen Qingqiu had no words. The cover of the booklet Lo Binghe was holding indicated it was the promising newcomer that held the honor of being a target of aggressive restriction alongside Regret of Chunan, Song of Bingqiu. Its author was listed as the Three Holy Mothers. This one has even more to teach, and is far more detailed, said Lo Binghe. It doesn't take long to get the hang of putting it into practice either. This disciple brewed a jar of flower wine. No! Oops! Shit. I was supposed to find my way to the grocery store at some point over the next few days, which is over the past few days, which was why I thought that it'd be like, yeah, just the next time I'm in the grocery store, I'll pick up some wine, because apparently that would be really funny, as I've been made aware. And then I didn't. And then somehow, between then and now, I didn't have the chance to actually get to the store that's literally just down the street. So I therefore had no opportunity. I hate missing a punchline. Oh, that kills my soul. Hang on. This disciple brewed a jar of flower wine according to its instructions. Shall we see whether its effect is as described? Looks to me like it just has even lower depths to plumb. Shen Qingqiu knew that under no circumstances was this jar of wine meant for drinking. I had a feeling. What with all the wine glasses in chat? Wait a minute. The props were all prepared. Had Lo Binghe just been putting on a pitiful act to mess with him? Probably. Lo Binghe pulled Shen Qingqiu's hips up, leaving his rear pointed high as his back arched into a limber curve, his back toward Lo Binghe. This was the condition Shen Qingqiu had set for accepting his request. If Lo Binghe insisted on trying something from the book, he would do it from behind, or else Shen Qingqiu really wouldn't be able to hang on to his easily wounded dignity. Though Lo Binghe was eternally obsessed with fucking Shizun face to face, he was impatient to put what he had learned into practice, and he had learned from this booklet that the person on the bottom could more easily feel pleasure if they did it from behind, so he happily agreed. He picked up that jar of rare fine wine, pressed its long, skinny neck. Ah! Okay. Enema vibes. Oh, once again, tight pink entrance on Shen Qingqiu's lower half, and slowly pushed it in. The neck of the jar was tapered, so it entered easily, but the farther in it was pushed, the tighter his hull clung to it, which makes sense. The chilly wine poured in, and his insides clenched at the sensation. Shen Qingqiu grabbed the blankets beneath him, brow knitting together. I don't know why my brain just shorted out at that. He could hear the gurgles of the wine as it poured into his intestines, and the swollen drooping sensation in his abdomen was more and more obvious. Shen Qingqiu couldn't help but say, "That's enough." Lo Binghe obediently stopped, but the mouth of the wine jar remained inserted inside him. I love how we got that little detail. This wine was refreshing at first blush, but its delayed effects were strong. Soon, Shen Qingqiu's insides began to burn fiery hot. Unable to relieve himself of this painful itching sensation, he shifted his arms to crawl forward slightly. I wonder if this has some kind of similar effect to, what's the term for it? It involves ginger. But it doesn't have a name, anything that's even remotely related to ginger. Figging, I think, is what it is. Because raw ginger apparently makes things extremely sensitive when used in a similar way. This time, Lo Binghe didn't stop him. The mouth of the jar slid out of his entrance. Oh, with a pop. I don't know why that hit me. Shen Cho clenched before the wine could dribble out, and then he didn't know what to do. Letting wine pour out of his house right in front of Lo Binghe would be far too humiliating. But he had only moved a bit, and he already couldn't take it. He was afraid his hold would slip with even the slightest movement. Lo Binghe draped himself over Shen Cho, one hand playing with his pointed, pale red nipples as he gnawed on the smooth skin of his shoulder. His other arm lifted Shen Cho's sore, weakened hips and lined up his cock. This was my question. While it's already inside? I have not read anything specifically like this before, so I have some certain curiosities as to when, where, and how exactly, like, the liquid would be drained. I have some logistical questions that I am learning literally in front of you right now. Where did that... His other arm lifted Shen Cho's sore, weakened hips and lined up his cock. The hot, hard tip poked threateningly against his rear until it found that small hole and rubbed against it. Looks like he really did learn a lot from that damned little booklet. Shen Cho couldn't take this teasing. His hands twisted in the sheets beneath him and sweat rose all over his body. As soon as his attention had wandered for a second, his clenched shut entrance was breached in one decisive thrust. Shen Cho immediately went limp from waist to legs. I would imagine so. His arms also failed to support the weight of his upper body, and he sprawled over the bed. The only good thing was that with Lo Binghe's considerable size, his entrance had been entirely plugged. I can only imagine the physical sensation that is happening in this guy right now. The wine was sealed securely inside Shen Cho, unable to leak out. It still hurt having that thing thrust inside him all at once, but amidst the pain, something seemed to be different. I'm so curious right now. The wine lit his insides on fire, the feeling full and hot and wet. When Lo Binghe began to thrust, Shen Cho couldn't stop the liquid from spilling out, as his delicate flesh was pulled outward, dripping like flowing nectar. The wet sounds that came with each movement made his entire face flush with embarrassment. A tingling sensation alongside an ache spread from deep inside his lower belly. That spot inside him thirsted to be rammed roughly against, to be fucked raw until it itched, but that flared head only brushed against that patch of tender flesh. Shen Cho's waist twisted in frustration, and he couldn't stop himself from pushing his hips back into the thrusts. Lo Binghe missed none of his tiny movements. He paused, panted for breath, then continued joyfully, "Shizun, does it feel good? Am I doing well?" He pistoned in and out, that's a classic, and more of the faint red translucent wine leaked out from the point of their union. Liquid splashed between Shen Cho's fair thighs. Fine wine and his disciple's cock surged inside him, raising waves. Shen Cho's knuckles went white as he clung to the blankets, and he clenched his eyes shut in anguish. Lo Binghe wouldn't give up. Does it feel good? Does it feel good or doesn't it? Shen Cho mumbled something. Lo Binghe couldn't make it out, so he leaned down to hear him, sending that thing between his legs even deeper inside. Shen Cho's tailbone ached with the stretch. He gasped, face. The burn of the wine had made Shen Cho red all over, as if his entire self had been steamed in liquor. Even his breath took on a refreshing flavor. Lo Binghe was tempted to lean in and kiss him at an angle, tongue searching inside his mouth, and found that even his saliva carried the heady fragrance of wine. "Shizun," he said, "do you want to see my face?" Shen Cho nodded, near imperceptibly. "You better be sure. It was on Shizun's request that we're doing it from behind. If you want to be face to face now, I'm afraid it won't be so easy to turn back." I think we passed that point a while ago. His low, hoarse voice puffed warm breath into Shen Qingqiu's ear. Shen Qingqiu's head spun, and he dazedly clenched his hull. Lo Binghe abruptly pulled out and roughly flipped him over into the powerless position of lying face up. A pink flush clouded Shen Qingqiu's pale cheeks. His eyes and the tip of his nose were especially red, and some tears hung from the ends of his eyelashes. Lo Binghe kissed each of them, one by one, the fingers of one hand tenderly circling the soft outer rim of his entrance as the other slid under his back to support him. He said lightly, "Shizun, look." He guided Shen Qingqiu's chin. As soon as Shen Qingqiu looked down, he saw the mess of wine and fluids at the base of his fair thighs. Between two plump mounds of flesh, a flower seemed to have bloomed, its ring of petals swollen a little larger, leaving some of the entrance outturned as it twitched pitifully and dribbled white fluid. Wait, this sounds familiar. I don't think it's as pronounced, and somebody feel free to correct me. But in terms of puffiness and sensitivity, that reminds me of the ginger thing that I only read like once, so feel free to correct me. Come on. There we go. Shen Qingqiu couldn't manage to speak, and he subconsciously lifted an arm to cover his eyes. Lo Binghe gave him a few comforting kisses on his cheek, then thrust in again. Again, it burned like fire. Lo Binghe let go of his back, and Shen Qingqiu collapsed. Black hair splayed everywhere across the bed, fingers powerlessly sinking into the taut muscles of Lo Binghe's back. His neck arched. After another round of vigorous thrusts, the wine in Shen Qingqiu's belly had more or less entirely leaked out. The passage that had been thoroughly washed with strong wine was in an excellent state, warm and flexible, sensitive and amorous, but guarded, yearning to squeeze and cling to the outside invader with all its strength, yet afraid this thing would tear its thin walls. When it becomes a whole-ass character unto itself, that alone is a fanfiction signpost. Tradition, one might even say. I'm not usually this bad at losing my place. What sounds came from Shen Qingqiu's hole? And see, how do you lose a place like that? And his legs locked tightly around Lo Binghe's waist, buttery smooth inner thighs rubbing against his skin, toes curled, a drunken look on his face. The fragrance of alcohol drifted through the air, going to their heads. Shen Qingqiu was truly intoxicated. But before he sank so deep as to lose consciousness, Lo Binghe woke him up. He put an arm beneath Shen Qingqiu's hips and stood up from the bed. Shen Qingqiu sank down under his own weight. The cock inside him instantly pushed through layers of flesh and hit a spot extremely deep inside him. There it is. His heart was nearly thrust right up into his throat, like what was piercing him in that instant was a honed sword, and he began to squirm desperately. But at that moment he was entirely suspended in midair, and however much he twisted, he could only further embed that invading object into his hole, making this traitorous disciple's length furiously grow in girth, stretching him until he felt about to retch. But the scariest part was still to come. Pun intended? Lo Binghe began to walk. This position sent Lo Binghe's cock extremely deep inside Shen Qingqiu. Yeah, gravity alone. With every step, that thing didn't pull out, but rather vaguely jostled about inside him, the angle constantly changing, but always enjoying a massage from Shen Qingqiu's hole as it clenched and trembled. Moreover, in addition to being fucked so deep he felt he was going to retch, Shen Qingqiu became afraid he would fall. That would be my issue. That would be my issue with this exercise. I would absolutely feel like I was about to fall. He really couldn't take it anymore. He gasped out in fits and starts. Wait a minute, it's too deep. Binghe, put me down. Lo Binghe nibbled on his earlobe and mumbled through slightly heavy breaths. Shizun, it's not deep enough. It's still not enough. He had stuffed Shen Qingqiu's belly full. How deep do you want? Shen Qingqiu groaned. What else are you? Where else are you trying to go? Having had his fill of fucking him while standing, Lo Binghe pressed him down on the table. Shen Qingqiu's upper body was shoved down against the top of the table, his arms twisted behind his back as his legs trailed weakly to the floor. The edge of the table fit into the crook of his pelvis, spread wide open as Lo Binghe's hips crashed against his, the table shaking under their movements. Shen Qingqiu's face was pressed to the table as that hardness moved in and out between his legs. He was already at his limit, trembling all the way from his hips to his toes, nearly unable to stand. But Lo Binghe was still holding those two pale mounds of flesh in his hands, pressing them together in the middle so he could experience the overwhelming pleasure of being squeezed by hole and ass all at once. Shen Qingqiu felt more tormented than ever by the foreign object between his hips, not to mention how his bottom was being kneaded and slapped in a way that didn't hurt, but which was extremely humiliating. Not long afterward, Lo Binghe switched techniques again. He only pulled out a little bit each time, then thrust back in even harder as the flesh beneath his hands was squeezed out of shape with the force of his grip. Shen Qingqiu sprawled over the table, his center burning under the steady grind in a way that both hurt and itched. He felt on the verge of insanity but was locked in place, unable to move an inch, forced to take everything Lo Binghe gave him. Lo Binghe truly deserved the title of star student. He could overwhelm someone simply by copying from the lesson materials. Shen Qingqiu wanted to weep but couldn't find the tears, and he could only weakly whimper, What exactly did you read? And that's the end of that side story. Damn, I need a mop to get all this wine off the floor. Jesus. And not just wine. There are some fluids laying around over here. I don't know about y'all. Like, star student, that's the punchline for me. Lo Binghe truly deserved the title of star student. She could have ended it right there and had that been like the punchline of the whole thing. However, ending it the way she did with what exactly did you read, also flawless. So really, win-win situation here. The next side story is technically chapter 30. I do not even know how many of the extra stories we've read at this point. But this one is called Honeymoon on page 323. Light a cigarette after the previous chapter, but then also potentially prepare one, because if this is like their honeymoon, I'd imagine we're not done. Of course, this had to be the afternoon in which our lawn gets mowed. Apologies if you can hear that. It usually doesn't take them very long. It shouldn't be a problem. After harboring the devil incarnate Lo Binghe for a dozen or so days, Qingjing Peak's disciples finally couldn't take the harassment anymore and begged Shen Qingqiu to take the person in question and lie low. Shizun, I hate Baijian Peak, Ning Yingying whined. Hate, they're such brutes. They've destroyed the mountain gate so many times already. Shizun, I really didn't tell them this time. This disciple swears, you have to believe me. Mingfeng complained tearfully. He nervously glanced at Lo Binghe. Why not let Lo Shidi out to spar with him a few times? After beating them up enough times, they'll no longer dare to harass Qingjing Peak. Lo Binghe was utterly unmoved. Shizun and I barely have any time to discuss business. Where would I get the extra hours to spar with those wild monkeys? Shen Qingqiu demurely waved his fan, unspeaking. To be fair, this so-called discussing business was more researching new dishes, cleaning the bamboo house's cutlery and furniture, and coming to act cute and sweet with all those propositions, no matter the time and location. Mingfan sniveled tearfully as he wailed, Shizun, do something! Onding Peak... That's the right page. Onding Peak is no longer willing to come fix our gates. Every time this disciple has to descend and ascend the mountain, traveling several hundred kilometers, and spending out of his own purse... His howling annoyed Shen Qingqiu to no end. Ultimately, he finally and magnanimously did a great deed, Accompanied by Ming Fun's overflowing gratitude and Ning Ying Ying's reluctance to see them go, the great master left Qingjing Peak. Hence, he was rather depressed. Shit, what the hell was this? Shidi El had condoned his subordinates and minions' attack on Xixiang-S's gates, and he hadn't even provided any compensation afterward. Having suffered economic losses, Xixiang-S went to Shidi X's department to request an allocation of public funds, but Shidi X refused to approve it. Then Disciple M, do you have red string out? Then Disciple M not only demonstrated zero selfless spirit with regards to contributing to the collective funds, he even kicked his own master off the mountain. Traitors, the lot of you. That said, Lo Binghe looked very happy. As long as he could cling to Shen Qingqiu, anywhere they went was the same in his eyes. Plus, it was more in line with his desires to not have that group of eyesores hovering over them every day. Shizun, where shall we go next? He said in delight, tugging on Shen Qingqiu's arm. Shen Qingqiu glanced down at Lo Binghe's pose, at how he had encircled his arm with both of his own, and found it hard to look. He really was becoming more and more like a maiden. They looked exactly like mushroom-picking little girls, which has a footnote. Oh, that's a Chinese nursery rhyme. They looked exactly like two mushroom-picking little girls walking out the door, hand in hand. There's like a really cute little text emoji depicted. Hang on. This is like really adorable because they chose to represent them. Where can I? Right there. Oh, focus. Can we get a focus? Thank you. Right there. Look at them. Adorable. Get my face out of here. Shen Qingqiu was blasted by his own man-made landmine. He asked in response, "Do you have anywhere that you'd like to go?" Lo Binghe gave it some thought. "How about we go to places we've been to in the past and see how they've changed?" Thereafter, the two arrived at the first stop following their eviction from Sangchang Mountain, Shuang Hu City. I feel like I've been able to pronounce that easily before. Why is that tripping me up now? Originally, Shen Qingqiu had intended to go by sword, which would have let them arrive within an incense time, but Lo Binghe seemed to have gotten some kind of idea in his head and insisted that they use a carriage. Using one was fine. Shen Qingqiu didn't care either way. Who could have guessed that after they got on the carriage, Lo Binghe would use that shyly expectant expression that he thought he was hiding well, to stare at him. The carriage interior wasn't very large, so Shen Qingqiu had nowhere to run. He took that burning stare until his hair stood on end. "Are you asking for car sex? Don't even think about it. This master absolutely won't agree. You really are a traitor." Lo Binghe stared at him for a long time, but when he saw no particular gestures from Shen Qingqiu, meaning they weren't of one heart, his head slowly drooped. He prodded his fingers together cutely. "Shizun, don't you remember?" he asked, a bit at a loss. Shen Qingqiu realized then that when it came to his everyday internal monologue, it basically always started with a beat of silence. "Remember? Remember what?" Lo Binghe was disappointed. "Back when the Qingjing Peak disciples left the mountain together for a training experience, you let me ride with you." To think Lo Binghe remembered even such dusty old affairs with such clarity. Meanwhile, Shen Qingqiu had pretty much forgotten most of it. Lo Binghe sighed. So Shizun really didn't remember. Faced with this contrast, Shen Qingqiu couldn't help but feel guilty. He waved his hand, letting Lo Binghe lean against him, then rubbed his cheek to pacify him. "Shizun only temporarily forgot. I'm sorry." Having been pacified, Lo Binghe was satisfied, his lips curving upward. Shizun's acts of kindness toward me far surpassed this moment. How could he remember each and every one? Pure silence. "Could you not headcanon me as such a loving Holy Father? I really had just forgotten I can't live up to your divine expectations." That's not a scene break, but it is a new scene after that. Shen Qingqiu and Lo Binghe wandered leisurely down the main road past Shuanghu city's gates. Stalls crammed with eye-catching goods bordered them on either side. In the middle of it all, a gorgeous banner fluttered in the breeze. Shen Qingqiu's gaze was drawn to the banner before it dropped to the face of the stall owner sitting beneath it. His smile, with its trademark subtle, looking warm and elegant at first glance, but in truth cool and lofty, froze upon his lips. Lo Binghe was far too sharp. "What's wrong, Shizun?" he instantly asked. "An acquaintance?" Crowds thronged around the small table below the banner. It seemed to be a Jianghu fortune-teller stall. Behind the table sat a beautiful and sultry woman, radiating 1,000 types of grace. With a toss of her fine hair and a lift of her lovely face, she met Shen Qingqiu's eyes from a distance, and promptly looked like she'd swallowed a kilogram of arsenic. But then her gaze turned and landed on the face of Lo Binghe, who stood beside him. Her love for this specific type of man came first above all, and her eyes shone with a sudden bright light. So she took the initiative to greet him. "I trust that the immortal master has been well." "It's been a while," said Shen Qingqiu. "The madam is even lovelier than she was when last we met." This beautiful woman was Madame Mayen. She waved away the enamored male customers by her table, clearing out space for them while smiling delightedly. "The immortal master is radiant with happiness today. So, did my words from our last meeting not all prove true?" Though she was certainly talking to Shen Qingqiu, her eyes were turned in Lo Binghe's direction, and her flirtatious air was both enchanting and seductive, making clear her true intentions. It had been a long time since Shen Qingqiu recalled the fortune Madame Mayen had told for him way back when, but the key words had been younger, illustrious status, outstanding talent, first-class beauty, often together, deeply in love. Shen Qingqiu realized with a shock that every single one had been dead on. "This Shen deeply admires the madam's skill," he said. "However, it seems that back then you forgot to tell me the most important thing." She'd gone on, hyping it all up until it had practically been raining flowers, but she'd failed to say, "Shen Qingqiu, your fated partner is a fucking man." Oh, we have art. Lo Binghe blinked a little, then smiled. "Shizun, your relationship with this madam seems quite intimate." Though he was smiling at these words, Shen Qingqiu felt a toothache coming on. When he thought about it, Lo Binghe and Madame Mayen had originally been meant to be a pair of cheaters who engaged in countless one-night stands, but now they sat very properly opposite one another as they talked past each other, and the atmosphere was supremely uncomfortable. Indeed, it made for an extremely unsettling picture. Shen Qingqiu gave a hollow laugh. "It's not intimate. Not intimate at all. It has been many years since we met. I never thought we'd meet again in the Jianghu. Why can I not pronounce... I've said it before. Nor that the madam would have started this sort of business in Chuan. See? Whose city? Madame Mayen humphed. "Isn't this all thanks to that cultivator who accompanied your distinguished self on your previous patronage?" "Which cultivator?" Lo Binghe suddenly said. Shen Qingqiu's smile froze a second time. Madame Mayen commenced angrily complaining. "Don't blame me for speaking badly behind his back, but when you came, we extended such a courteous invitation, and we treated neither of you immortal masters poorly. Yet he was truly incredible, collapsing half my cavern right off the bat and scaring away most of my sisters. The next few times we met, he wouldn't leave me even the slightest bit of face. I've lived for a long time, but I have never met such an unfeeling man, one who understands neither romance nor tenderness, who only runs about fighting and killing." "Your name's been spat upon, Lu Qingge. You've actually been spat upon." Art of the face-off. That's kind of cool that we get art of her, actually. I don't think she popped up in art at the time when last we saw her. The kind of violent actions described could only be attributed to one person. Of course, Lo Binghe understood, and he stared at Shen Qingqiu. "Shizun, was it Lu Shishu? When did you leave Sangchong Mountain alone together?" Shen Qingqiu saw the veins bulging in his forehead and coughed dryly. "That was when you were absent." Lo Binghe pinched his palm hard. "Shizun, Could you give a concrete explanation to your disciple as to what exactly happened between you, Lu Shishu, and this succubus who's as beautiful as a flower? Coaxing Lo Binghe was already a piece of cake for Shen Qingqiu. The steps were, first, calmly say, not as beautiful as you. Then, before Madame May's spasming smile, promise, nothing happened, really. If this doesn't work, repeat steps 1 and 2. Madame Mayen clearly thought the flames hadn't been fanned high enough. I did throw some of our succubus's mesmerizing fragrance on that cultivator you were with before I left, she said from the side, though given his frigid nature, I doubt it was much of a problem. A succubus's mesmerizing fragrance. The name alone told you everything. An aphrodisiac. Lo Binghe's face was rapidly filling with rage. Nothing happened? I swear to the heavens, really, nothing happened. I didn't even have to jerk him off. Lo Binghe was both jealous and bitter. This disciple was in the endless abyss, cutting his way through thorns, while Shizun was surrounded with green hills and crystal waters, and enjoying himself with other men. The hell do you mean other men? Can't you use proper terms like colleagues or sect siblings? Shen Qingqiu waved his fan with incomparable integrity and humphed. What do you mean by enjoying himself? In a desolate mountain full of frenzied monsters, one person kicks the other into a freezing watering hole and gives them pneumonia. What's there to envy in something like that? That's all? That's all. Madame Mayen chewed her nails. What do you mean, watering hole? She said hatefully. That was my beloved rose pool. And we have a new scene yet again. Since they'd come to my mouth just does not want to make that today. Simply does not. Shuang? Closer? Hue City? Naturally, they needed to look for something to do. For example, they ought to at least eliminate some pests for the civilians. After asking around, it turned out that Chen Manor was yet again experiencing strange incidents. That one year, the wicked, vicious Skinner demon had transformed into the old master's beloved concubine, Daer, and hidden within his manor. After they'd killed her, the room in the wing where she'd once lived had been the site of continuous disturbances. Every night there were wails and screams that sent all the residents into a panic. This had remained unresolved for years. Counselor Chen was already approaching 70 years old. His hair was a snowy white, but his ambitions were the same as ever. Many years ago, for better or worse, the only lovely concubine clinging to him had been Daer. But today he had a girl on either side, and they made for a beautiful pair of matching wives. The Skinner demon who looked at his side in the past hadn't weakened his ardent passion for women in the slightest. This old gentleman was already of advanced age, but his memory was by no means poor. When he saw Shen Qingqiu, he even loudly called out to him, "Immortal Master Shen!" Immortal Master Shen's lofty aloofness was the same as it had been last time around. He waited until old Master Chen asked about the young master beside him, then finally tugged his lips up a little and said gently, "This is indeed my little disciple from back then." Old Master Chen smiled. No wonder he looked so familiar. Only after seeing this immortal master and his beloved disciple together did I realize how many years had passed. The conventional exchange of greetings was naturally handed to Lo Binghe, who'd already assumed his former role as the little secretary who handled everything. Shen Qingqiu was happy to stand aside and shut his mouth, sliding into his badass poser act. As he watched the badass darkened demon lord Lo Binghe work patiently, acting as sweet as a true apple of his eye, Shen Qingqiu inevitably began to float with happiness. It felt so wonderful. His gaze on Lo Binghe couldn't help but fill with more and more parental affection. Meanwhile, with every 2 lines Lo Binghe spoke, he looked over at Shen Qingqiu as well, and once his gaze shifted over, it was unable to leave. In this way, master and disciple spent a long period of time making eyes at each other before Shen Qingqiu suddenly and finally snapped out of it. How immoral were they being? Well, I mean, let me ask you this, man. You ever had any good wine? On their way to the room in question, Lo Binghe kept trying to hold his hand. Shen Qingqiu was, 1, worried about outsiders, and 2, wanted to tease him, so he purposely refused to let him. The two of them skirted around each other, whipping out all sorts of tricks. If anyone from the cultivation world or demon realm had seen this master and disciple duo using their sex techniques to play fight, in parentheses, flirt, until those arts were unrecognizable, they would definitely have coughed up 3 liters of blood. As no one dared to approach the room that was rumored to be haunted, it was naturally very quiet and peaceful. The courtyard was the same courtyard as it has been when they last saw it. It hadn't changed at all, except for the considerable amount of yin energy. When he saw that, at last, there were no people around, Lo Binghe latched onto Shen Qingqiu without delay, rubbing against him as he held his waist from behind, his chin hooked over Shen Qingqiu's shoulder. "We didn't get art of this?" He asked in a whisper. Does Shizun remember this place? Of course he remembered. Wasn't this the place where he'd first turned on easy mode? That's way back. Alright, that was a joke. How could he not remember? This was the place where he'd screwed Lo Binghe over for the first time, and so terribly. Back then, in order to preserve his own life, he'd almost let the Skinner demon strike Lo Binghe on the head. It had been a rather unkind thing to do, and now that he'd recalled it, he even felt bad. He was too ashamed to think about it deeply. When he didn't answer, Lo Binghe began to bitterly complain. Shizun, you've really forgotten? This disciple is so anguished. Ever since the two of them had begun fooling around, Lo Binghe hadn't been able to pass a single day without becoming anguished at least several dozen times. When Shen Qingqiu spoke a couple of words to other people, he'd become anguished. When Shen Qingqiu took 2 fewer bites, he'd become anguished. When Shen Qingqiu complained that the bathtub was too small and kicked him out, he'd again become anguished. His anguish was like snacking on broad beans, showed up with a snap, then disappeared with another snap. But now that he was standing at the scene of his former crimes, Shen Qingqiu felt guilty and couldn't help but soften a little. His roast of crazy demon dissipated before it could be posted. He quickly reached up and patted Lo Binghe's cheek. Don't be angry. Today, Shizun will grant you 1 request. But let's deal with the evil spirit here first. Lo Binghe was delighted. Really? When has Shizun ever... Shen Qingqiu was about to continue, but he shortly shut his mouth to avoid tragically embarrassing himself. Whether he finished with lied to you or screwed you over, both would basically be slapping himself in the face. Since Shizun said so, Lo Binghe pulled out length after length of red rope, his face flushed. Hello, immortal binding cable. Goodbye, immortal binding cable. When Lo Binghe saw Shen Qingqiu's look of sheer disbelief, he didn't force it. He just sighed, staring up at the sky. For some reason, he said softly, ever since the day this disciple safely escaped from the Skinner demon, on many nights, he experienced strange dreams. What do you mean by strange dreams? The kind of dream where you have to wash your underwear after waking up? I don't think we're talking about those type of dreams. I'd be somewhat surprised to discover that we were, but I guess now that you say that, it's not entirely ruled out. Stranger things have happened. Shen Qingqiu had sinned. It turned out that he had even been the pubescent Lo Binghe's Sexual Awakening 101 instructor. A person's object of sexual epiphany was very important. Even if it wasn't a mega-buxom older lady with all her flowing curves, it ought to at least be a slender, delicate younger girl with a demure personality. Lo Binghe's life was so unbelievably tragic that it was hard to sum up. The one who'd given him his sexual awakening... Shen Qingqiu is actually about to classify himself as someone with... The one who'd given him his sexual awakening had a goddamn hot dog. Shen Qingqiu wanted to bow to him while crying in sympathy. But no matter how sympathetic, Shen Qingqiu would not give in. I mean, Shen Qingqiu was so deep in the hetero closet and heteronormative way of thinking that these residual thoughts, even after the fact, not surprising. Not in the slightest. But no matter how sympathetic, Shen Qingqiu would not give in. Though Lo Binghe's endless pestering and wheedling had ground away most of his integrity, every little bit he could retrieve counted. Even more importantly, can we deal with official business first? There's a cloud of black fog gathering behind you. It's here, it's appeared. Lo Binghe acted like he hadn't noticed a thing, and continued giving voice to his anxieties. Even now, this disciple is at times tormented by this dream. If he'd said in days past, it might have been believable, but a Lo Binghe who had mastered controlling dream realms being tormented by them, this lie was way too thick-faced and shameless, and said with all confidence at that. Shen Qingqiu put his hand on Shu Ya and lightly chuckled. So? Lo Binghe didn't even turn his head. That black fog couldn't take it anymore. Oh, this is censored with, the, I actually don't know what the term for it is, but it's like the kind of censoring that you see in comics with ampersands, pound signs, percentages, the percentage thing all in a row instead of the word. I'm guessing it's a stand-in for fuckers. That would be my first guess. Are you both blind? Can't you see me? This voice was very familiar, like that of a dear friend. Dire? Asked Shen Qingqiu. Don't dire or whire me. I'm me, the black fog snapped. I'm the Skinner demon who once struck fear into this city. Shen Qingqiu was speechless. Was this really that insignificant monster that he'd killed with a slap during a beginner-level quest? So the rumored vengeful spirit had been this guy all along. This fucking guy. In both life and death, they didn't forget to harass the residents of this manor. What a work ethic! The black fog forcefully spat out a mass of black smoke. Shen Qingqiu guessed that to them, this was the same as spitting out a mouthful of saliva. You two adulterers dare to come fool around before me, completely unaware of your impending death, they snapped. Lo Binghe furrowed his brow. Shizun, should we just kill them or capture them for later interrogation? Shen Qingqiu wanted to see just how stupid the black fog could get, so he raised his hand, signaling for Lo Binghe to stay still for now. The black fog made a questioning sound, then drifted closer to Shen Qingqiu. You look a bit familiar. Of course I look familiar. The culprit who murdered you is standing right before your eyes, and all you can do is doubtfully say, you look a bit familiar. How many years had passed? It had to have been at least 10. So under the powerful influence of easy mode, Dire's IQ hadn't increased in the slightest, and their memory had even declined quite a bit. Shen Qingqiu coughed once and reminded them. This Shen is the Qingjing Peak Lord. A silence, and then the black fog exploded. Shen Qingqiu? So it was you! Then who is he? You know him too, Shen Qingqiu said reluctantly. He was also at the scene that time. After the black fog thought for a long while, understanding suddenly dawned on him. He's your little whelp of a disciple! Now that Dire had finally remembered, they laughed madly without pause. Shen Qingqiu, good and evil both receive their due. Heaven enforces karma for all. To think you actually got by your own disciple! What an utter degenerate. Absolutely disgusting. I just knew that someone would come to exact heavenly justice. Shen Qingqiu had no words. No, that's wrong. As a demon who's committed many evils and received its due retribution, which is to say dying in a single slap from someone exacting heavenly justice, a line like, good and evil both receive their dues, heaven enforces karma for all, doesn't really suit you, does it? As the black fog laughed and laughed, something strange happened. It was as if a great wind blew by, scattering a mass of smoke, and the black fog gradually dissipated. Only a final black wisp remained, and it was still sighing in satisfaction. Retribution! Retribution! Shen Qingqiu, you finally met retribution. Serves you right. I can now die without regrets. Had they become a Buddha? Ascended to heaven? Been exorcised? Their bar for dying without regrets was surely a bit too low. And no matter how troublesome Lo Binghe was, it wasn't to the point that he could be called retribution. The yin energy within the courtyard suddenly vanished. Shizun, shall we continue? Asked Lo Binghe. Shen Qingqiu's lips twisted, and he looked at Lo Binghe, who was still clutching his handful of immortal binding cables. At a loss for words, he said, What do you want to continue? Didn't Shizun say that he would grant me one request today? So my request is to ask if Shizun would deign to cooperate a little and allow this disciple to lightly tie him up with this immortal binding cable, then stay bound for a while so that dream can come true and fulfill this disciple's years-long wish. Then this disciple can die without regrets. Shen Jingqiu stared at them. Though Dyer had already peacefully ascended to heaven via their own inexplicable sense of self-satisfaction, Shen Jingqiu felt like he couldn't return Shuya to its sheath just yet. He expressionlessly headed outside. Lo Binghe ran in front of him, cutting him off. "Shizun, you promised." Shen Jingqiu coldly pushed his hurt face out of the way. "Shizun, how can you do this to me again?" Lo Binghe said accusingly. "What are you crying about? Even if you cry, it's no use. Don't embarrass us in front of outsiders." Sure enough, when it came to this little beast, tender feelings and sympathy were fully unnecessary. He took back his words. Lo Binghe really was karmic retribution. That's the end of that one. We're on page 339 for 100 random questions on Lo Shen's affinity. Lo Shen? Is that the ship name? Lo Shen? That would be. That could be. So unless they're referencing something entirely different, I'm assuming Lo Shen is in reference to, Lo Binghe and Shen Jingqiu. Or was their ship name Bing Chu? Maybe I'm getting it confused. Oh, it's kind of both? Cool. Alrighty. Hello. The questionnaire interviewees. Lo Binghe and Shen Jingqiu. If I had just read the first freaking line, I will wander everywhere except the place that can give me information. Immediately. The questionnaire interviewer. No, come on. No, come on. The questionnaire interviewer. Airplane shooting towards the sky. The questionnaire provider. The system. Airplane shooting towards the sky system had issued him a quest, an extremely bizarre questionnaire. He had no idea what the questionnaire was trying to ascertain. The further down he read, the more disturbing the questions became. But no matter how disturbing it was, he had to farm some points, didn't he? After abandoning his dignity, what little remained in the first place, and pleading with Master Shen, Shen Jingqiu finally reluctantly agreed to bring along that disciple he'd raised for the purpose of completing this questionnaire. Now presenting live updates from Airplane. "Your names, please?" asked Shang Qinghua. Having just sat down before hearing this question, Lo Binghe raised his eyebrow and said unhappily, "If you don't even know our names, why would you ask us anything?" "Your ages?" To tell the truth, Shen Jingqiu didn't really know the precise age of this body. He raised his head at Shang Qinghua. "Wouldn't you know better than I do?" Shang Qinghua twirled the brush in his hand. He'd never thought about this question either, so he figured he might as well just say whatever. Therefore, he randomly wrote a number down in a couple of strokes. "Your genders?" Having received 3 idiotic questions right off the bat, Lo Binghe had already stopped bothering to answer. Shen Jingqiu couldn't take it anymore either. "We've been recategorized into the Green JJ's danmei section. What do you think?" Shang Qinghua silently drew a line through the next 30 or so similarly stupid questions, then started asking anew, "How is your personality?" Shen Jingqiu thought for a while. "All right, probably. This Shen should be considered relatively easy to get along with." "Don't know," said Lo Binghe. "And what about your partner's personality?" Shen Qingqiu began counting off traits. Crybaby, maiden-hearted, lovesick, chunibyo, and clingy. A watery shimmer shone in Lo Binghe's eyes, implicitly proving his point. Or really more like explicitly proving his point. Having been disparaged, he felt a little hurt, but he still obediently answered the question. Naturally, Shizun's personality is the best, gentle and strong and considerate. Shen Qingqiu fell silent. Suddenly he felt a bit bad. What is this? He coughed dryly twice and changed his tune. Actually, this child's personality isn't too bad. He has one good trait that is especially rare. He listens and does as he's asked. That's enough in itself. A blush rose on Lo Binghe's cheeks. When did the two of you meet? Shang Xinghua asked in a monotone. And where? He already knew the answer to this question. The first time I met Shizun was right after I had passed Sangchong Mountain's initiation trials. Shen Qingqiu was feeling ill at ease. At that time, Lo Binghe had met the original flavor, not him, and it wasn't a particularly wonderful memory either. He waved his fan. Pass! Pass. What was your first impression of your partner? Lo Binghe continued to reminisce. A lofty, untouchable immortal, he said buoyantly. A small bun, Shen Qingqiu said frankly. And a handsome little sprout. What do you like about your partner? He listens to me well enough, Shen Qingqiu said kindly. Lo Binghe smiled. I like everything about Shizun. What do you hate? Nothing, Lo Binghe said firmly. Shen Qingqiu was a little moved by this resolute and decisive answer, so he reciprocated and also said, nothing. Besides, if he really said he hated something and made Lo Binghe cry in front of someone else, that would be way too shameful. How do you address your partner? Finding this dull, Lo Binghe turned his head. Shizun, these questions are ridiculous. Exactly what did we come here for? Be good, Binghe, Shen Qingqiu said calmly. It's just a formality. Think of it as saving your Shang Shishu's life. How do you want your partner to address you? Lo Binghe's face reddened. This bashful reaction made an ominous premonition well up inside Shen Qingqiu. He waved his hand. Pass, 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 pass. Having caught on to a possible point of interest, Shang Xinghua wheedled. What do you mean pass? If you just pass, pass, pass every single question, what's the point in even asking? Binghe, Shiji, go ahead and say it. Lo Binghe nervously glanced at Shen Qingqiu out of the corner of his eye and quietly said, I'd like to be addressed in the way married couples normally address each other. Master Shen, did you hear that? Shang Xinghua asked instantly. Shiji wants you to address him like you're married. Husband, hubby, honey, you choose one. You shut up, said Shen Qingqiu. If you were to compare your partner to an animal, what would they be? Without needing to think, Lo Binghe said, a white crane. I can't think of an animal, said Shen Qingqiu, but I do have a plant, a black lotus. Lo Binghe didn't understand. Shizun, do lotuses come in black too? If you were giving your partner a present, what would you choose? And what present would you yourself like? As long as Shizun says the word, I will give him anything he desires. Uh-huh. I don't think there's anything I particularly want, Shen Qingqiu said honestly. As a peak lord, there really didn't seem to be anything that was hard for him to get. When he thought about it, it really did feel like he was sitting on top of a mountain of gold and letting it go to waste. Then I want Shizun to ignore everyone else and stay by my side for 3 days. Shang Xinghua licked the tip of his brush and muttered, why not just have him stay by your side for a lifetime? Lo Binghe shook his head. Then Shizun would be unhappy. At the sight of his dejected appearance, like that of a grumbling woman, Shang Xinghua was tongue-tied with shock. Conversely, Shen Qingqiu was completely calm. Silly child, you're thinking wild thoughts again. Why would this master be unhappy? My God, guys, get a room! How far has your relationship progressed? We've done all the things we should have, and some things we shouldn't, said Shen Qingqiu. Why are there things we shouldn't have done? Lo Binghe asked, hurt. Does Shizun feel that we shouldn't have done it? Right in front of Shang Chua salad. Shang Xinghua. No, if we really shouldn't have done it, this master wouldn't have let you do it. Where was your first date? Huanhua Palace Water Prison, said Lo Binghe. Shang Xinghua was silent. Shen Qingqiu was equally silent. Binghe, you call that a date? What was the mood between you at the time? Not very good, said Lo Binghe. That wasn't something that could be described as merely not very good. Where do your dates often take place? Shen Qingqiu rested his chin on his hand. The moment I open my eyes, I see him. And when I close my eyes, he's still the one I see in my dreams. Does that mean we're on dates all the time? Does Shizun find it annoying? Lo Binghe asked cautiously. Shen Qingqiu rubbed his back. No, you're just overthinking. Shang Xinghua thought that dating Bingmei sounded really fucking exhausting. It had only been a couple of questions, but Master Shen had already soothed him 3 times. This glass heart kept shattering and getting glued back together. Exactly when would it end? Fucking annoying. Shen Qingqiu is basically a kindergarten teacher who's taking care of a kid. Who was the first to confess? Me, said Lo Binghe. Of course it was him, said Shen Qingqiu. What things does your partner do that make you feel helpless? Shen Qingqiu shrugged and said weakly, whenever he starts to cry, there's nothing I can do. Yeah, we know. We are aware. Whenever Shizun gets mad, I'm unable to do anything. Shang Xinghua hummed in acknowledgement, bouncing his leg. He wrote it down while roasting them in his heart. They really are exactly like a kindergartner and his teacher. When you're together, what makes your heart race the most? When he pats my head and gives me instructions, Lo Binghe said earnestly. When he tearfully begs me for something, said Shen Qingqiu, exposing themselves. Woo! Also, this was written a little while back, but it's jogged something in my memory. Was there at least a little bit of a trend several years ago of characters of ships, of having ships answer questionnaires, basically, more or less, and just like sit down and answer a bunch of things rapid fire? Wasn't that kind of a thing in fanfic back in the day? Why am I kind of remembering that? Yeah? Wasn't it? Where could I possibly be? And why do I keep doing this to myself? Lo Binghe went on. And also when he scolds me and hits me. He was acting awfully Twitter-pated, but Shen Qingqiu was already very used to this. Shang Xinghua silently added a note beside Lo Binghe's name. A hopeless masochist. Beyond cure. Have you lied to your partner before? Are you good at lying? Right after asking this question, he confidently wrote the words, big fat liar, after Lo Binghe's name. Yes, said Lo Binghe, but never again. Have you fought before? What kind of fights were they? Shen Qingqiu sighed. We fought a lot and terribly too. Thinking about it now, I don't know why we did. It could all have been avoided. Why do you keep asking these kinds of questions? Lo Binghe asked angrily. You're making Shizun unhappy for no reason. Shang Xinghua shrugged. My bad. How did you make up afterward? Were the questions originally submitted by MXTX fans? And this is how she had them answer? That would make sense. It did say that the questionnaire was delivered by the system. And in a meta sense, that makes perfect... That aligns perfectly. That would be too fucking funny. Shang Xinghua shrugged. My bad. How do you make up afterward? Shang Qingqiu waved his hand. We boned to save the world. Is your relationship publicly known or secret? Have you ever heard the regret of Chen Shan? Shang Qingqiu shot back. The questions after that were on a free fall in terms of degeneracy. Shang Xinghua cleared his throat. Are you the top or the bottom? Lo Binghe was uncomprehending. What does that mean? While Lo Binghe genuinely didn't understand, Shen Qingqiu pretended not to. He waved his fan. Who knows what it means? Pass, pass, pass. How did you decide that? Shen Qingqiu thought for a bit. I really don't know. Somehow it just happened that way. Probably because he looked pitiful? Lo Binghe was perplexed. I still don't know what he's asking. Shen Qingqiu patted the top of his head. It's all right if you don't understand, he said earnestly. You're not at a disadvantage in any way. Where did you have your first time? Shen Qingqiu was about to answer when Lo Binghe barged in. Qingjing Peak. Lo Binghe once again barged in. Qingjing Peak, the bamboo house. All right, he'll never acknowledge such a failure of a first time, Shen Qingqiu thought. Let it be Qingjing Peak. There's nothing worth arguing over. Let him answer however he likes. I won't correct him anymore. What were you feeling at that time? Shen Qingqiu was silent. If he were to be honest, it came down to 3 words. Pain, pain, and more pain. But saying this in front of others would embarrass Lo Binghe far too much. Depressed, Lo Binghe said, Shizun was wonderful, but I was completely useless. The morning after your first night, what was the first thing you said? Shizun, breakfast is ready. Don't say anything else until you put your clothes on first. How many times do you do it in a month? Shen Qingqiu thought this was beyond ridiculous. Who's bored enough to count something like that? Also, why have the questions been consistently moving in such a strange direction? Roughly speaking, once every 3 days. Lo Binghe said seriously? Oh, if Shizun is happy, sometimes he'll let me touch him after only 2. Shang Qinghua chewed on the brush shaft, jotting down the records while muttering, This is unscientific. According to the way I wrote him, even if he did it from the beginning of the month all the way to the end without taking a break, it shouldn't be a problem. Then, under normal circumstances, where do you get intimate? He has an obsession with the bamboo house, said Shen Qingqiu. Lo Binghe smiled brightly while nodding. And where do you want to try to... It's censored with a beep, but the question is, and where do you want to try sex the most? If we're doing it anyway, what does it matter where we do it? Asked Shen Qingqiu. Baijian Peak, Lo Binghe said evenly. The room fell silent. The Baijian Peak training grounds, Lo Binghe said calmly. The fuck? Thought Shen Qingqiu. Is it your life that you don't care about, or your face? Thought Shang Qinghua. What sort of agreements do you have about fucking? If it hurts, he has to tell me, said Lo Binghe. He absolutely has to. No crying aloud, said Shen Qingqiu. Say, have you guys misunderstood the implication behind the word agreement? Asked Shang Qinghua. If you can't have a person's heart, then you should at least have their body. Do you approve or disapprove of this line of thinking? That's a loser's, a degenerate's take on things, Shen Qingqiu said contemptuously. Without the heart, what use is the body? Lo Binghe asked. Shang Qinghua thought sadly about how under his pen Lo Binghe had obliviously been a peerless stallion who'd pursued only his desire to fuck, and the number of women it's another censored word, but it's for the R word, and the number of women that he'd had definitely been in the double digits. He'd known that the Lo Binghe in this strange world had turned gay, but exactly how had he fallen step by step to this point? If your partner was assaulted by a thug, what would you do? Asked Shang Qinghua. This question was way too surreal. Shen Qingqiu was speechless for a long time until he said, Who would be stupid enough to assault him? Even if you were trying to die, at least look for a better-looking way to do it. Lo Binghe rolled up his sleeves, then said in a leisurely manner, I'd turn them into human swine and throw them into the endless abyss. Then I'd think of some other methods by which to slowly punish and play with them for 10 years before finally killing them. Honestly, same. If a good friend said to you, I'm very lonely, so just for tonight, and asked to be intimate, would you agree? I don't have such shameless friends, Lo Binghe said indifferently. I don't need friends. Head lowered, Shen Qingqiu scraped at the tea leaves in his cup, then took a sip. I also don't have such friends. Really? Lopingha said doubtfully. Luciushu wouldn't say that kind of thing? Tea sprayed all over the floor. Shang Qinghua, who had his upper body sprayed with tea, had gone to change his clothes and returned, and now continued his questions. Do you think you're good at sex? What about your partner? Shen Qingqiu let out a dry laugh. Lo Binghe looked on the verge of tears. Shen Qingqiu saw his melancholic expression, miserable beyond words, and pity filled his heart. He turned back toward Shang Qinghua and said angrily, Isn't it obvious that this is a sensitive topic? Pass. Shang Qinghua picked at his ear. Okay, it's all my bad. Are you interested in S&M? What is that? Shizun, why are there more and more things I don't understand? Oh, he's asking whether you like hitting me and he's asking whether you like me hitting and scolding you, or if you would feel anything if I pricked you with a needle or burned you with a flame, said Shen Qingqiu, so casually. Because he just knows, right? He just knows. Lo Binghe looked a little bashful, then said softly, As long as it's Shizun, how could this disciple dislike it? Shang Qinghua understood. He picked up the pen and with a flourish wrote, Lo Binghe has great interest in S&M. And I think there is where we're going to take our break really quickly because my tea is very cold and almost gone. So I'm going to go grab some more tea really quickly, and I will be right back to continue this questionnaire. Hold, please. Alrighty. Fresh tea has been gotten. Let us continue from where we left off, which was page 349. Shang Xinghua making the note that Lo Binghe has a great interest in S&M is where we left off. In case you had forgotten, that was our stopping point. What's the most agonizing thing about sex? He's too small, said Lo Binghe. He's too big, said Shen Qingqiu. I have absolutely had it with them. Shang Xinghua silently swore at this master and disciple, calling them shameless, then wrote with another flourish, "Go figure it out yourselves." Has the bottom ever actively tried to seduce the top? Shen Qingqiu pointed at himself. Me? Do I look like that kind of person? It's hard to say, because you also looked pretty straight, Shang Xinghua murmured. Where do you like being kissed? Lo Binghe said, forehead, fingers, lips, everywhere. Honestly, this child can't kiss, Shen Qingqiu said helplessly. He only knows how to bite. Oh, that's terrible. What's the best way to please your partner during sex? Praise him for improving, said Shen Qingqiu. Not crying, said Lo Binghe. Shang Xinghua's brush flew like the wind, and he absent-mindedly added another line. Master Shen's standards are so low. What do you think about it those times? Who issued this questionnaire, said Shen Qingqiu. Do they have any experience at all? At that kind of time, your mind is utterly blank. What else can you think about? Do you remove your own clothes, or does your partner help remove them for you? If I let him do it, I wouldn't have many clothes left to wear, Shen Qingqiu said. Shizun, how can I control my strength at times like that? Lo Binghe said defensively. How many times in one night? How many times? Shen Qingqiu asked. No, I mean, do people really make a point to count that? Shen Qingqiu is really just out here like, man, I just get railed and then get railed again. Like, why are you all thinking about this so much? Who puts this much thought into things? I just bend over. Why are we taking stats? Shang Xinghua turned the page, ready to keep asking. But Lo Binghe had long since lost patience and smiled coldly. If you want to know that much, I'll count today, then tell Shang Shishu later. That will do. The last question. Really, it's the last one. What do you most want to say to your partner? Master and disciple glanced at each other. Shen Qingqiu waved his fan. We're done here, Binghe. Let's go home and eat. Eat what? All right, Lo Binghe said obediently. He wrapped an arm around Shen Qingqiu's shoulder, then kicked open the door and left. A strong wind gusted into the room, blowing over the pile of questionnaire sheets Shang Xinghua had just completed until they had drifted all over the floor. Shang Xinghua's lips twitched uncontrollably. He squatted down and picked up a couple sheets, but after some time he suddenly fell to his knees. Cucumber bro, you scam artist. That's definitely not what you most want to say to your partner. My quest. Master System, please don't deduct points so quickly. There's only one question that didn't get answered. Ah, Cucumber bro, you fucker. One question that didn't get answered? Don't dangle something like that in front of me. That was the end of it, by the way. Cucumber bro, you fucker was the end of that. You can't just dangle that there's one question that didn't get answered. What's the question? What's the answer? You can't do that to me. I'm way too much of a nosy bitch. How dare you, MXTX? Oh. We're on the final story. We are on page 353. That was a blast, by the way. The questionnaire was a blast. That was too much fun. Once again, MXTX is having too much fun. And that is one of my favorite things to encounter as a reader who is also a writer. Being able to sense just how much fun a writer is having is like none other. It's so good. The last side story, extra story, whatever you want to call them, is called Wedding. Now, honeymoon wasn't exactly a honeymoon. So wedding may not be. But then again, if you're going to call the last or what, I feel like she would give that to us, right? Shen Qingqiu walked for a few steps, waving his fan, before he discovered that the person who had been clinging so tightly to him this whole time hadn't come along. He turned around to see Lo Binghe standing in place, staring at something in a state of distraction. Curious, Shen Qingqiu asked, "Binghe, what are you looking at?" Only at this did Lo Binghe snap out of it. "Shizun, Shen Qingqiu was even more curious now. He walked back and looked in the same direction Lo Binghe was staring, only to see a lively crowd gathered before a moderately sized residence as they surrounded a couple of crimson-clad newlyweds whose faces were obscured. At present, the rowdy gathering was moving into the courtyard. The street was loud in the first place, so he hadn't noticed that a couple was holding a wedding right in front of them. Two young maids were standing at the gates, handing out wedding candy from the baskets on their arms to passers-by. In crisp voices, they called, "Spreading good fortune! Spreading good fortune!" Shen Qingqiu's first thought was classic wet blanket. Has this family been beset by some evil creature or ghost? But no matter how he looked, he couldn't find anything strange. Just as he was about to ask, he saw Lo Binghe walk over on his own. The young maids had never seen a handsome man of his caliber, and both were struck dumb as soon as they looked up, forgetting to even hand over their candy. Lo Binghe ended up taking it from their hands himself with serene poise. After acquiring their wedding candy, Lo Binghe returned to Shen Qingqiu's side, satisfied. "Shizun, let's go." Shen Qingqiu nodded. The two of them walked for a while, shoulder to shoulder. Lo Binghe was still playing with those two round wedding candies wrapped in red paper, and he took another look back at that festively decorated residence, with its streams of people flowing in and out. He still seemed to be thinking about something. "Is there something up with that residence?" Shen Qingqiu asked. Lo Binghe started. "What does Shizun mean by something up with it? If there was nothing up with it, why would you pay it so much attention? You don't even like candy." A look of understanding came over Lo Binghe's face, and he smiled. "It's nothing, just sharing in the good fortune." He was so earnest when he spoke that Shen Qingqiu couldn't help but smile. "This master doesn't recall you believing in such things. Have you never seen anyone get married before?" "It's not that I haven't seen it, I just never imagined that sort of thing could have anything to do with myself." "You never imagined marrying a girl in the future?" Lo Binghe shook his head. Shen Qingqiu felt this was rather unscientific. "Really? Not even a bit?" No matter how you put it, Lo Binghe, the former Lo Binghe, that was the male protagonist of a stallion novel. How could he never have nursed any beautiful hopes of that kind? And with airplane shooting towards the sky's shitty tendencies, his beautiful hopes would hardly have stopped at marrying a beautiful woman. They would have been more like marrying a 3-digit number of beautiful women all at once, at minimum. Of course, Shen Qingqiu knew the current Lo Binghe wouldn't do such a thing. But how could he never even have thought about it? How could he have thought that marriage had nothing to do with him? Lo Binghe thought, then said, "I truly never imagined it before." Shen Qingqiu noticed that before. "So you mean to say you think such things have something to do with you now?" he teased. Unexpectedly, this time Lo Binghe didn't reply. That's a scene break. On page 355. After that incident, over the next few nights, Shen Qingqiu didn't know if it was just him, but Lo Binghe seemed to be especially energetic. Meanwhile, his own old waist, hips, and legs were suffering even more than usual. They returned to Sangcheng Mountain every 2 months to visit the family. Because of this, no one was surprised whenever they showed up again. Instead, they enthusiastically surrounded them while munching on their dragon-bone cantaloupe seeds. "Huh? Who is this?" Ching Ching Chi started. "Isn't this the Qingjing Peak Lord? You're back again? A rare guest." "It is he," said Shen Qingqiu. "Did you bring any local specialties from the demon realm? Aside from that one next to you." Lo Binghe clearly grew from the human realm's soil. He shouldn't count as a demonic specialty either way, should he? Shen Qingqiu thought. Even if I did, no one would want to eat them, so I didn't bring any. Suddenly, a young man walked over, dangling something in his hand. Shen Qingqiu called out, Lu Shidi, long time no see. What is this? Lu Qingge expressionlessly caught the feebly gasping thing Shen Qingqiu had thrown back at him and tossed it back. A short-haired beast, he said. It's edible. Shen Qingqiu chucked it at him again. I'm not eating it. I still have the one you gave me years back. It's grown enormous, and it spends all day gnawing on the bamboo on Qingjing Peak. I don't want another. The two of them tossed the short-haired beast back and forth as it shrieked in midair. Gnawing on the bamboo at Qingjing Peak? Are they tossing a panda? Shin Shixiang, I think you should just take it, Wei Qingwei cut in. If one of them is male and the other is female and you put them together, maybe they'll be drawn to each other and won't gnaw on the bamboo anymore. But what if they're both males? Silence. In the past, when Lu Qingge walked over, Lo Binghe would have begun to emanate an icy aura and make all sorts of snide remarks, enmity on full display. But today, he seemed to be in a bit of a daze, standing by Shen Qingqiu's side and not saying a word. Shen Qingqiu found this rather strange. Not only did he find it strange, everyone else found it strange too. Whenever the sect siblings from Sangchang Mountain got together, the conversation never stopped, and any little remark could get played on forever. But today their conversation was extremely short. They usually headed off to Zuishan? Zuishan. My pronunciation today. Zuishan? Yeah. Peak? To have a meal together, but seemingly because of Lo Binghe's strange aura, no one brought up doing so. Before everyone scattered, Qi Qingqi dragged Shen Qingqiu to the side and asked, What's up with your disciple? What do you mean, what's up? Today, your disciple. Did you have an argument? We didn't. Shen Qingqiu didn't show anything on his face, but his hand tightened around his fan. Oh, then that's good. But I feel like your disciple was so odd today, like he was holding something in. Shen Qingqiu felt it too. When they returned to the bamboo house, Lo Binghe was still in that strange state. Shen Qingqiu had just sat down on the bamboo couch when a huge crash came from the doorway. He rushed around the screen, only to see Lo Binghe sprawled on the floor, with Mingfan, Ning Ying Ying, and the other disciples gaping at him in shock. Shen Qingqiu went to help Lo Binghe up. What happened? It's nothing. Before Lo Binghe could finish speaking, Mingfan yelled, Shizun, Lo Binghe tripped over the threshold. Shen Qingqiu had no words. Oh, we have art. Lo Binghe glared at Mingfan, and Mingfan shrank back in fear. Be on your way, Shen Qingqiu said hurriedly. Go prepare for morning reading tomorrow. As he closed the door, Lo Binghe silently sat down next to the table. Helping him up, I presume. Their faces. No. Just. Shen Qingqiu. Oh, no, that's my face. My face is just right there. Can't have that. Shen Qingqiu looked at the red spot where his forehead had smashed into the ground and sighed. What's been up with you these past few days? Lo Binghe was silent. Sit and don't move. This master will get you a hot compress. He turned to go to the water basin, but just when he had wrung out a strip of cloth, he heard another huge crash behind him. He startled and turned around, only to find Lo Binghe sprawled on the floor again. Confusion written on his face, and worried that Lo Binghe was too dizzy to sit or stand, Shen Qingqiu rushed over. Are you? But as soon as he reached him, Lo Binghe grabbed his arm. Shizun, marry yourself to me, won't you? That was not art of them getting up. That's not what that was. Shen Qingqiu's expression cracked, just a bit. Impressive. When I proposed to my wife, I could not, this was me trying to hold my hand still. And my throat was entirely closed because I was sobbing too hard. So like, this is some boss moves. This is impressive. Having noticed how unusual Shen Qingqiu's expression was, Lo Binghe hurriedly said, Shizun, if you don't want to marry yourself to me, I could also marry myself to you. When Shen Qingqiu didn't reply, Lo Binghe's voice went monotone and he asked again, Shizun, are you willing to... His Adam's apple trembled more and more and his voice began to quiver as well. Marry me? Shen Qingqiu still didn't say anything. Bit by bit, the fire in Lo Binghe's eyes dimmed. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, If Shizun is unwilling, I... Slow down, said Shen Qingqiu. He struggled for a while. So these past few days, you were acting so odd because you wanted to ask me this? Lo Binghe stared at him, then carefully nodded twice. Shen Qingqiu found the next few words difficult to get out of his mouth. So you're... Lo Binghe helped him finish. This disciple is proposing to Shizun. Shen Qingqiu was speechless. He sat down at the table and buried his face in his right hand. He didn't know what he should say or do. He should have found it absurd. Even though he and Lo Binghe had confirmed their relationship a long time ago, he had never imagined that Lo Binghe would actually, how should he put it? Propose to him. Holy shit, he had proposed to him. This word was profoundly frightening when applied to a young man like him. And who knew how many times Lo Binghe had practiced in private just to say these few words? At least a few times. I can say that from experience. And my proposal was only 3 words. Outside of, will you marry me? And who knew how many times Lo Binghe had... not to mention how he had been so nervous that he'd been completely strange and abnormal, unable to even talk. He tripped over the threshold just trying to walk inside, and he'd even stuttered. But Shen Qingqiu didn't want to make fun of him at all, nor did he want to play hard to get. Yep, Shen Qingqiu was terrified to realize that the scariest part was that he was actually, just a little bit, happy. Lo Binghe was clearly still nervous. His throat bobbed up and down. When Shen Qingqiu removed his face from his hand, he took the chance to say, Shizun, if you don't want to, you don't need to answer my question. If you don't answer, I'll still understand what you mean. Please don't say it out loud. It doesn't matter. If you think it's too much trouble, you can just ignore me. Just pretend I was making a joke. It's fine. Shen Qingqiu smacked him across the head with his fan, furious. It's fine, my ass. Well. Having been suddenly smacked by that fan, Lo Binghe touched his head and blinked, clearly not understanding why he had been hit. This innocent expression made Shen Qingqiu nearly choke on anger. He had just begun to feel happy about it when this brat, in the next moment, said, It's fine, you don't need to answer, just pretend I was making a joke. The last bit in particular sent Shen Qingqiu into a rage, and he lashed out to smack him with his fan again. Is this anything to joke about? Lo Binghe quietly took the hit and whimpered, I was wrong. Of course you were wrong, and this master was just about to say yes. Lo Binghe was halfway through apologizing when he started. Shizun, he said carefully. What was that? Nothing at all, said Shen Qingqiu. Shizun! Shen Qingqiu sighed. He didn't say anything, but he motioned Lo Binghe to come closer. As expected, Lo Binghe moved. Given his total familiarity with every movement of Shen Qingqiu's body, the mere sight of Shen Qingqiu motioning at him meant he didn't need a single verbal instruction to understand the intent. He obediently went to pour a cup of wine. Then Shen Qingqiu took the jar and poured himself a cup, after which he motioned to Lo Binghe to take another. I mean, that would be kind of a wild thing to pull at a proposal, but I wouldn't necessarily put it past him. You know what I'm saying? Shizun, is this... Shen Qingqiu picked up the cup he had poured himself and wound his arm around Lo Binghe's. Lo Binghe's handsome face immediately began to glow with life. His hand shook so much that he nearly dropped the cup, and his arm trembled to a frightening degree. With their arms crossed, Shen Qingqiu nearly spilled the wine in his own cup all over his chest. I thought, Lo Binghe stammered out. You thought you would definitely be rejected, didn't you? Shen Qingqiu said expressionlessly. Lo Binghe had no reply to that. So you said you didn't want to hear the answer, because you thought you would definitely be rejected. A silence. I was extremely anxious. Lo Binghe looked straight into Shen Qingqiu's eyes. Shizun, That day, didn't you ask me if I truly hadn't imagined such things before? I really never did. You're allowed to imagine, Chen Qingqiu said. There was nothing wrong with fantasizing. Was fantasizing illegal now? I could get on a soapbox about that question. Besides, what about the chance that your fantasies could actually be realized? When I was young, I thought that no one could want a person like me, said Lo Binghe, so I never imagined that anyone would be willing to have me. Damn! You're far off the mark. Later on, Lo Binghe continued, I had Shizun. You were clearly already by my side, but even so, I could never overcome my anxiety. I felt that you might leave me at any time. I didn't know what I should do. I wanted to become stronger, and I wanted to become better, but I still felt like it wasn't enough. I still couldn't stop myself from being afraid. Chen Qingqiu also looked straight into his eyes. After a while, he stroked Lo Binghe's head and sighed. Oh, Binghe, I still don't know what I should do now. Then just do what you want to. 4 hours later, they sat across from each other on the bed, shedding their clothes. Lo Binghe had been terribly stubborn about certain things. He had instantly pulled out 2 sets of bridegroom's robes from who knew where, begging and cajoling Chen Qingqiu to put them on and go through the full proceedings again with him, to bow to the heavens and earth, drink the crossed cup wine, and retreat to the bridal chamber. Chen Qingqiu found himself thinking, even if we put the wedding clothes on, won't we just take them off again later? He sort of wanted to laugh, but he let Lo Binghe do as he pleased. He'd never really thought that Lo Binghe would be the traditional type, constantly dreaming about getting married. At the same time, while it made him want to laugh, he was also overcome with affection, and he began to take it seriously as he too got caught up in the mood. Lo Binghe's own red clothes were half off when he started staring at Chen Qingqiu and lost the ability to move. Binghe? Asked Chen Qingqiu. What is it? Shizun, you look really good in red, Lo Binghe said in an earnest tone. Chen Qingqiu's skin was fair, and the red of the wedding robes cast a rosy tint on his face, adding an eye-catching splash to his usual appearance. And Lo Binghe's gaze as he drank him in was even more besotted than usual. Chen Qingqiu started, then let out a light cough. Though Lo Binghe always talked like that, he was still rather embarrassed. He said reservedly, You also look very good in red. Very good was barely sufficient to describe the effect. He didn't believe a single girl could look at such a handsome bridegroom and not cry and wail to marry him. He was about to compliment him further when he saw Lo Binghe bring out a sheet of snow-white silk and reverently spread it over the bed. Chen Qingqiu felt an ominous premonition. What are you doing? Lo Binghe blushed. This disciple heard that it is the common rule for a newlywed couple's wedding night. Before he could finish, Chen Qingqiu felt goosebumps erupt all over his body. Any other rules or traditions were fine, but this tradition was way too strange when applied to him. Shizun, this disciple swears he won't really let you bleed, Lo Binghe said hurriedly, red-faced. I just wanted to go through every step of the ceremony like a real married couple. Chen Qingqiu blushed. Let's just forget these kinds of superfluous I'm too gagged by everything going on. Superfluous formalities. He was just about to take away the white sheet when he saw Lo Binghe looking at him on the verge of tears. He could never withstand Lo Binghe looking at him like that, and now he couldn't bear to do away with the sheet. After a long time, he helplessly forced out a few words. But as you said, even if we lay it out, it won't be of any use. Lo Binghe looked hurt as he replied, But without this essential item and this essential step, how can it count as a wedding night? A beat. Fine. If you insist, just leave it. Lo Binghe promptly hugged him and buried his head in the crook of Chen Qingqiu's shoulder. Shizun, you're so good to this disciple. Chen Qingqiu forced himself to stay calm. I'm so-so. As he spoke, he felt one of the arms around him going in the wrong direction. Lo Binghe efficiently stripped Chen Qingqiu until not a stitch remained upon him, leaving only the pair of snow-white calf-length socks on his feet. Even though this master-disciple pair had done it countless times already, for a person like Shen Qingqiu, some matters of pride couldn't be entirely conquered no matter how many times it had been. When he looked at Lo Binghe looming over him, he felt faintly nervous. He tilted his head and closed his eyes, feeling one hand land on the inside of his thigh, trying to spread open his legs. He resisted a bit at first, but soon he went along with it and spread them. He felt a finger on his lips as Lo Binghe cajoled him. Shizun. Shen Qingqiu opened his lips a crack, allowing Lo Binghe to put a finger in his mouth. He licked it with a light touch. Because his eyes were still closed, the sensation of that slender finger stirring around in the warm cavity of his mouth, playing with his tongue, was even clearer. One wasn't enough, and soon a second finger was pushed in. As Lo Binghe took in Shen Qingqiu, struggling to take his fingers deeper, wetting them more with his tongue, his eyes sparkled. He pulled them out and reached toward Shen Qingqiu's lower body. After some ministrations, the tight, pale hole in the valley between Shen Qingqiu's thighs was dripping wet, looking incredibly soft to the touch. Lo Binghe laid himself over Shen Qingqiu, careful not to crush him. Shen Qingqiu felt a hard, hot, round head pressed against that most secret part of him, and his entrance opened around the front half of the tip of that ferocious member. That's the phrase of the day. We had some fleshy stuff earlier. Ferocious member, that's the phrase of the day. He could even feel the forceful pumping of his arteries. Shizun, Lo Binghe said in a low voice. I'm going in. Shen Qingqiu had kept his eyes closed the whole time, but he nodded slightly. Lo Binghe held his waist with both hands, then plunged forward. Shen Qingqiu couldn't keep a groan of pain from escaping his throat, and he grabbed the arm Lo Binghe had locked around his waist. Even if he had made his mental preparations and relaxed himself as much as he could, if it didn't fit, it didn't fit. Lo Binghe's cock wasn't even halfway in before it was caught in place. The person beneath him was warm and soft within, but that ring of muscle at his entrance refused to cooperate, clamping down and keeping him from going deeper. Lo Binghe spared one hand to stroke up and down Shen Qingqiu's cock. Pleasure trailed through Shen Qingqiu with the attention, and when Lo Binghe felt him relax a little, leaving room to advance, he continued to push forward. Being split open was extremely uncomfortable. Shen Qingqiu's back arched, unwittingly presenting the two pale bumps on his chest to Lo Binghe's face. Lo Binghe's hand wandered up to rub his nipples. As a man, Shen Qingqiu didn't really like when someone played with that part of him, as it filled him with a strange feeling of humiliation. He went to push Lo Binghe away with a trembling hand, but then Lo Binghe leaned down, and a strangely wet and swollen sensation came from the right side of his chest. Shen Qingqiu's face flushed so red it practically looked like it could drip blood, and he hurriedly tried to push Lo Binghe's head away. But just as he started to panic and become distracted, Lo Binghe sank down again and buried himself entirely into that place between his legs. Shen Qingqiu felt as if his entire body had been split in two by a blade of flesh, name of my band in college, by the way, in case you didn't know, and pain exploded in his lower body. The pain spread from Lo Binghe's excessively large cock, as we are aware, bulldozing through his insides as it advanced into his passage, making him feel as if a whole arm had been stuffed inside him. That's a visceral image, MXTX. And that large, full head was like the fist on the end of that arm, nearly making him want to pass out on the spot. But as Lo Binghe adeptly brushed past a certain spot inside Shen Qingqiu, his cry of pain changed its tune. Lo Binghe held him by the waist and rammed against that spot. After several more rounds of this, his hole finally softened, along with the tightly clenched muscles of his rear. As soon as he relaxed, that place on Shen Qingqiu's lower body became awfully sweet. His entrance was long and deep, warm and wet, and it could be plunged into all at once while it was powerless to resist. From Lo Binghe's angle, he could see how Shen Qingqiu looked beneath him just by glancing down. Shen Qingqiu's eyes were closed, brow faintly knitted, expression hovering between unbearable pain and unbearable pleasure. His thighs were spread, his long, smooth, and pencil-straight legs folded up to his chest, and his white socks were still properly snug on his feet. The sight excited Lo Binghe beyond measure. Shen Qingqiu's hands were clenched in the sheets, and he took every slam of Lo Bingha's cock inside him with gritted teeth, each one making him fear that his internal organs were getting rammed out of place. But there was nothing he could do but wrap his legs around Lo Bingha's waist and adjust his own rhythm, clenching and relaxing as he took Lo Bingha in and out. The soft flesh around his entrance burned with pain from the friction, and he hissed, "Bingha, gentler." He felt he had definitely still ended up bleeding. It can feel like that, though. So, the jury's still out, but it can definitely feel like that when it's actually not that serious. Lo Bingha looked down, then froze. Sure enough, a dark red streak trailed down from the point of their joining, answering my question, thanks, and sometimes it's right on the nose, and seeped onto the snow-white sheet, spreading in a bright patch of color like a fallen peach blossom petal. But of course he did. For the symbolism of it all. Of course he did. I was so silly to not realize that that was going to happen. After a long time, Lo Bingha murmured, "Shizun, I'm sorry. I said I wouldn't actually let you bleed, but I still..." Shen Qingqiu was getting... Shen Qingqiu was getting fucked to death and back, and he had absolutely no strength to prop himself up and look at his lower half. Either way, he didn't need to know it would be a frightful sight. The worst part was how, even as Lo Bingha apologized, the movements of his hips didn't slow in the slightest. His movements were so forceful that Shen Qingqiu slid up and down as his bottom both prickled and ached. Don't what? Don't call me Shizun." Getting called Shizun at this sort of time, when his ass was blossoming right in front of him, always made him feel like he had been rather too assiduous in his role as a mentor. "If I can't call you Shizun, then what should I call you?" Shen Qingqiu sobbed. "Anything you want, anything. Slow down, Bingha, slow down." Lo Bingha slid an arm around his waist and gave him another 2 hard thrusts, took a gasping breath, and said, "Okay then, Shizun, if you also call me something different, I'll slow down." With his waist being lifted, Shen Qingqiu felt that enormous thing plunge even deeper inside him. "Call you what?" Lo Bingha paused in his movements, still holding him, and said, extremely bashful and reserved, "It's our wedding night, Shizun. You tell me. What should you be calling me?" Silence. "Help me." Shen Qingqiu shook his head frantically. Lo Bingha was still waiting in blissful anticipation. "Shizun, that's what I want you to call me, okay?" To his disappointment, Shen Qingqiu clenched his jaw, refusing to open his mouth, even as tears welled in the corners of his eyes. At the sight of his resistance, Lo Bingha's eyes instantly filled with tears. "Shizun," he said in dismay, "we've already come this far, and you... Why will you still not..." Lo Bingha sounded extremely distressed. Shen Qingqiu told him he definitely wouldn't fall for this again. But Lo Bingha's tears were basically some kind of fantastical item that he could summon with a snap, and just like that, they began dripping down. "Just once," said Lo Bingha. "If Shizun is unwilling, do it just this once. I'll remember, and I won't push you to do it ever again after today. Is that still no good?" Shen Qingqiu's face was showered in Lo Bingha's tears as that thing assaulted his insides, leaving him in practically unspeakable suffering. When you're like this, how am I supposed to say no? In the end, Shen Qingqiu decided to concede one more time, but there would definitely, absolutely not be a next one. With difficulty, he sucked in a breath and struggled to say in a quiet voice, "A husband." Lo Bingha's eyes immediately lit up. "Shizun, what did you say?" Shen Qingqiu repeated, The latter half of the word was as quiet as a mosquito's buzz, furtively swallowed as he switched to pleading. "Bingha, you... slow down, would you?" But how could Lo Bingha let him get away with it just like that? "Shizun, a bit louder. I didn't hear you clearly." This top. In a surge of passion, he got overly excited and his movements became greater as well. After a few hard thrusts, Shen Qingqiu felt as if his organs were roiling in his stomach, and finally, he fully surrendered. Shen Qingqiu's hands tugged helplessly at Lo Bingha's hair as he sobbed and cried out, Husband, I'm begging you, stop. I can't take it anymore. I really can't take it anymore." Before he could finish crying, Lo Bingha picked Shen Qingqiu up entirely and made him sit in his lap as he plunged to the deepest spot inside him, one arm under his rear and the other around his waist as he moved him up and down. In bliss, he called out, "Wife." save me. As soon as he heard this, Shen Qingzhou's entire body, including his whole, clenched tight in despair. Holy fuck, shut up. Don't call me things at random. But Lo Binghe didn't listen to a single one of his protests. He forced Shen Qingzhou up and down on his cock as he embraced him. Shizun, you're the best, he said quietly. I always wanted you to call me that. Can you do it a few more times? Amazing how we turned the corner from, oh, just say it once. If you really don't want to, I just want you to hear it once. I'll never ask for anything ever again, I swear, I promise. A flow of warmth trailed down the back of his neck. Shen Qingzhou didn't need to look to know that Lo Binghe was sobbing again. Shen Qingzhou truly had no defenses against him whatsoever. Their limbs were intertwined, both of them sticky with hot sweat. Lo Binghe's waist and back shone with moisture, and Shen Qingzhou nearly couldn't hold on with his legs alone, so he hooked his arms around Lo Binghe's neck to stop himself from sliding down. This drew them even closer, until the space between them was practically non-existent, and he left a smattering of passionate kisses on Lo Binghe's face in encouragement. To Lo Binghe, I just hit the mic, to Lo Binghe, his cooperation was like candy given to a child. His eyes lit up in joy, and his lower body worked with even more force. The solid, ridged, flared head ground back and forth in Shen Qingzhou's well-tormented hole. Another phrase. The, ferocious has attacked the well-tormented, you know? Until he finally surrendered and entirely stopped trying to clench his jaw, letting out a cry of both pain and pleasure. Lo Binghe loved this sound more than anything. He loved every sound Shen Qingzhou made. Before Shen Qingzhou's consciousness faded completely, he still heard Lo Binghe whispering in his ear, Shizun, call me that again. Until his consciousness faded completely? Did we do the until one of them passes out trope? That's what it sounds like to me. When he woke up the next morning, Shen Qingzhou's first thought was that he wanted to smash himself to death against that extremely well-developed short-haired beast on Qingjing Peak. He swore up and down that he'd lost his entire life's worth of face last night. He absolutely couldn't suffer another moment more embarrassing than that. Oh, don't challenge Lo Binghe. Maybe we don't push that. Lo Binghe lay beside him in high spirits. As soon as he saw that Shen Qingzhou was awake, he swooped in for a kiss. Shen Qingzhou suspected he hadn't slept at all and that he'd stayed up staring at him the whole night. Pretending to be asleep would be pointless. He wanted to say something, but his throat was so hoarse that he only got out a few slurred sounds. With that kiss, Lo Binghe seemed to have gotten everything he wanted. Shizun, get some rest. I'll go make breakfast for you. He was about to get up and get dressed when Shen Qingzhou mumbled out a few words. What is it? Lo Binghe asked. Shen Qingzhou's face was already very red, and with Lo Binghe's question, his flush became even more evident. He mumbled, nothing. Lo Binghe wanted to press him on it, but he controlled himself. Then I'll go make breakfast. He carefully covered Shen Qingzhou back up with the blanket, turned, and got off the bed, where he picked up the clothes on the ground and slowly put them on. Shen Qingzhou sat on the bed, the clothes that Lo Binghe had pulled over him draped over his body, and stared at Lo Binghe's slender and handsome silhouette from behind. He stared at him for a long while, and suddenly, as if he'd been possessed, mumbled, Husband? Lo Binghe's body froze. As if his entire person had been nailed to the spot, he turned around extremely slowly. Shizun, what did you just call me? Shen Qingzhou's tongue tied itself in knots. Huh? He'd wanted to explain, but there was nothing to explain. This master, as they said, people shouldn't trigger death flags. He just said he couldn't embarrass himself any further in this lifetime, and then he'd gone and embarrassed himself more right away. This time, Lo Binghe hadn't pushed him to the messy brink of passion, nor had his heart been softened by Lo Binghe's tears. There was no excuse. Key word. Non-sexual word of the day. There was no excuse. That was to say, he had simply, for some reason, wanted to try calling him that. But afterward, he was so embarrassed that he practically wanted to dig himself a hole on the spot, or bash himself to death against a chunk of tofu. In the end, Shen Qingqiu finally gave up on explaining himself and lay back in defeat. Forcing himself to remain calm, he said, "This master is hungry." Lo Binghe lay back down with him, smiling. "Shizhen, I'm hungry too. If you're hungry, then go cook." But being a bit late to breakfast once in a while was no big deal. And that's it. Aww. Aww. On the end page, it says system update completed. That's oddly emotional. But no, that really is, that was the key word. There's no excuse. It's like, oh, well, when he cries, I just have to give him everything that he wants. It's only because he cries. Not because I'm like overwhelmingly in love with him and would do anything for him and would absolutely die for him on the spot and want to call him husband. It's not that. It's that he cries, or because of this, or because of that. That was the continued, what's the right phrase? It's kind of like we've been pulling Shen Qingqiu along this development, and it took him like the entire trilogy to really finally acknowledge that he has feelings for a man and that he might not be straight. And there was like this continued, it's like he had gone to, oh, okay, I have feelings for him. Like, I get fucked by a man. I guess I have feelings for a man or whatever. But like, we don't talk about it. It's all low key and whatever. And it's like, it's not like I would, it's because he cries and because he blah, blah, blah. And I'm just mentoring all of that jazz. All an excuse. It's just an excuse. It's just an excuse. And he finally got there. He got there. He got there when he didn't have an excuse. He wasn't just fucked really good beyond all reason and therefore did something embarrassing. Lo Binghe didn't just cry at the drop of a hat and therefore, oh, well. Title page. Something on the title page. Title page. Oh my god, we're not even running that late. That's fantastic. Hang on. Title page. There's the cover art. That's not the title page. Oh, wedding art. Oh, damn. That's like full color and everything. Look at that. No, that's gorgeous. That's so beautiful, though. The flowers along his sleeve. Shut up. Oh. And there was a note, too, somewhere? Oh, yeah, there's a symbol on his forehead. Did I read that wrong, or is there a note? Hang on, I still have my face in the way, so I can't even see you guys clearly. Was there a note from MXTX in here somewhere? Oh, at the end. Okay, I thought they were both at the beginning. That's incorrect. Okay, hang on. One moment, please. Ah, here it is. Directly after the end page. Hello, English readers. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey through the world of Scum Villain. I hope you had a wonderful time. I hope we can meet again soon. Yeah, how is that latest project coming? MXTX? How's that coming along? Any kind of timeline would be nice. Any kind. Even if you have to be like, yeah, it's gonna be like 2030, bitches, before you see it. I want a date to put on the calendar. I don't care if I have to buy a calendar for like 5 years from now. I will do it. A time frame. Any kind of time frame. on your new work, MXTX, and that would be greatly appreciated. I hope we can meet again soon. Why is she so sweet? Holy shit, I've read everything. Now, I've read this woman's entire catalog. And that's not a small feat. It's not like saying I've read every book by Gillian Flynn, which I have, but she has 3 books. Total. Okay, she has 3 books. Saying that I've read all of MXTX, that's a whole other thing. And I will gladly read more. Hell, at some point down the line, I'll probably read them again. Let's be real. That is absolutely fucking bonkers that was her first work, her first published work. I can't remember exactly if we know this or not, but this was the first thing that she published or started posting or what have you. But was this like the first thing she had ever written, or had she written other stories when she was even younger? Because she wrote this when she was in high school. Had she wrote other stuff even younger, and this was just the first one that she made public. I feel like I should know this, but I can't quite remember. But either way, being in high school, when you write something like this, is freakish. That's not right. That's deeply unfair. And so damn impressive. That makes me want to put her in like prodigy territory. Because if you are unfamiliar with what most, 16-year-olds writing sounds like, it's not this, I'll tell you that much. It's not even remotely this. Not by a long shot. Your average 16-year-old does not do this. At all. Your average 16-year-old writer does not do this. This is weird. This is a her thing. She did write other stories. She writing short horror stories very young. Cool, yeah. She had written unpublished stories. That's just something that I like to keep track of and remind myself as a writer that even though there's a writer's, first published work, that does not mean it's the first thing that they ever wrote. And that sounds really obvious, but that's something that I used to get caught up about when I was younger. And it's one of those things that when you think about it for half a second, you're like, oh, that's so silly. But if your brain's just on autopilot about it, it just kind of makes that association that just because it's the first thing that they have put like into the public's hands, so it's just a nice reminder for me personally to be like, it's rarely ever the very first thing that that person has written that is the thing that actually makes it to the public and takes off and all that jazz. It's just important to remember, for me anyway. Oh, fan art. Yeah, didn't I either did a stream or a video. I think I had to do a video because I don't think I could stream it because that gets into kind of dicey territory. But I swear I did a video for Untamed fan art that was great and fun and a long time ago at this point. But I haven't done one for Heaven Official's Blessing, and I haven't done one for Saving System. So actually, that would be an interesting... I have a pen. Where's my... That would be an interesting thing to do, like a joint... I'd do one for both. I'd ask for fan art from both, and then that way I would have videos covering like all the fan art, you know what I mean? I'm making a note of this. One moment. Because that's right, I didn't do one for Heaven Official's Blessing. Huh. I should do that. Yeah, I remember doing that, and that was, for the Untamed, that was fantastic. I would totally do that again. Official art as well. Animatics? I believe so. Yeah, because you could just link them to whatever the source is. And with the way that I had to do the MDZS fan art, I had to jump through a bunch of links anyway. I have to go and refresh my memory as to how exactly I did the Modazushi art one and, you know, act accordingly. But yeah, it's, if I remember correctly, it's just a links thing, so that would work. That would work, yeah. It will almost certainly have to be just a video. I don't think I'd be able to stream it. Especially since I would need to, I like having the credit, the artist credit, like right on the screen rather than just saying it once. It's a whole thing. All right. Yeah, I'd start like a Google Doc. I have written down the recommendation. Skinzun? All right. I have dinner to go make, and the rest of Villain Saving System, Self-Saving System to absorb, really. I can't believe she did that at such a young age. And I can't believe that she did this, and then she did Modazushi. And then she did Heaven Official's Blessing. And, like, she already started at a perfectly amazing, like, the bar she set was already, like, this is... It's the fantastic thing of having read an author's entire work and having it all be so fundamentally good that any answer for which one is your favorite is justified. Like, I understand. I understand. It makes sense. No, I got you. I understand why this would be your favorite of MXDX's works. Duh, you know? It'd be silly to be like, what? I don't get it. Like, no. Sorry. She's too good. She's always been too good. I'm, like, accosting you with the book. But she's always been too good. Damn it. So, I'm going to go absorb. And then, whenever I get the Google Doc and everything for the fan art recommendations, like setup and stuff, I'll be posting that. I don't know if I can post that directly in like a YouTube community post. I should be able to. I feel like that'd be fine. But it should be posted to Tumblr, YouTube, and the Patreon, absolutely, for everybody, including the free members who are hanging out on the Patreon. So you'll know when it goes up. You'll know when that happens. And then I'll figure out a place to slot that into my schedule sometime in the next, like, month or two, ideally. It just kind of depends. So, that was a time, but like a good time. A couple of good times. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys enjoyed the last session, the last reading session for this series. I had a blast. I learned some things. There was one or two things in there that I had never personally encountered before. And if you are at all, I don't recommend just doing that. I fling myself into the wild blue yonder. I don't look up trigger warnings. I don't look up content warnings, by and large. I just kind of throw myself at it and see what happens. I don't necessarily recommend that to people. That's living dangerously in a lot of respects. maybe don't do that if you can't, if you can't at all. Um, so I learned some things today, very much so. Uh, but I had a blast doing so, and I'm very, very glad that you guys did too. Thank you for getting to the end of this, and not just potentially the end of Self-Saving System, which is already freaking fantastic because I've been reading this for a second. There was a big delay, so this has been an ongoing thing for a while now. So getting to the end of this is already amazing, and I deeply appreciate that. But if you've been here for like all three, or you have watched all three, or you intend to, like maybe you're starting here because you're going in order, or what have you, that blows my mind. That I can't like handle. My mind's already blown that you'd stick with me for a series from her, because even her shortest series is pretty considerable, right? So I really appreciate sticking with me and all of this for that long. That means a lot. Thank you so much. This is the last day to vote for the next book that we read. Urha is currently in the lead, but Guardian is in second place, is in a decent second. And there are 3 other options as well. So if you have not voted, that is on the community tab. Go vote. Today is the last day. It all ends tomorrow when the winner is decided. So go vote. I will see you for the next book. We will take that as it comes, and I will fling myself once again into potentially very treacherous waters that I have been ultimately prepared for. Thank you guys so much. I love you very, very much. I will see you back very soon to resume reading streams. Have a wonderful, beautiful day. I hope you're having a good week, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. And I will see you for the next stream. Alrighty? Bye, guys.